the Valley's greatest hits. The greatest hits of all time. Rod Wolf's Sunday Night Hall of Fame. WODE's 99.9.
On this week's Hall of Fame show, and as part of our tribute to rock and roll instrumentals, we feature an artist that contributed some of the best tenor saxophone playing of all time. There were countless sax players in the history of the music business, but we are about to concentrate on one of the more influential of all those musicians, Gene Barge, also known as Daddy G. Gene was the leader of the studio house band of Legrand Records in Norfolk, Virginia. But even before that, his musical prowess had come to the attention of many recording artists. And his story is a rather unique chapter in the history of rock and roll music. Born on August 9, 1934 in Norfolk, by the time he was only 22, he had already recorded a solo record for the Chess Checker label group in Chicago. That record was called Country. 1956 was also the year that Gene's path crossed with a singer from Atlanta, Georgia. Chuck Willis was in nearby Newport News for an appearance and sent out word that he needed to fill a saxophone position in his backup band. And he let it be known he wanted Gene Barge to come and play for him. Gene would tour with Chuck Willis for the rest of the year, eventually winding up in New York City. On January 31st of 1957, Chuck was to record some songs for Atlantic Records, and he wanted his sax player to record with him. And it was a good choice, because the country soul-sounding saxophone sounds of Gene Barge helped to define one song in particular. In fact, the song Chuck and Gene recorded that day started a dance craze. The kids on bandstands started doing a line dance to the song, and by the summer of 1957, Chuck Willis was nicknamed the King of the Stroll.
Just see, Rider, go see what you has done. Yes, yes, yes. See, Rider, see what you has done. Girl, you made me love you. Now your man has come. See, Rider, see, Rider, see, Rider.
The record C.C. Rider remained in the charts for over 6 months, peaking in the top 15 during July of 1957. Other hits for Chuck Willis, like Betty and Dupree, would follow. Then in April of 1958, the final 45 RPM release by Chuck would hit the charts, again highlighting the saxophone playing of Gene Barge. Ironically, the 45 RPM release had 2 strong sides to it, and disc jockeys were torn between which side to play first. One side was called What Am I Living For? The second side was called Hang Up My Rock and Roll Shoes. On April 10th of 1958, 1 week before the record hit the best-selling surveys, Chuck Willis passed away in Atlanta, Georgia.
What am I living for, if not for you? What am I living for, if not for you? What am I living for, if not for you? Oh, nobody else will do. I want you close to me, that's all I know. I want you all the time, because, darling, I love you so. What am I living for, if not for you? What am I living for, if not for you? What am I living for, if not for you? Baby, nobody else will do.
The Valley's greatest hits of all time. Oldies 99.9.
My mama told me she didn't like that rock and roll. I said, please, mama, please. Mama, you just don't know I don't want to hang up my rock and roll shoes. You know I get that feeling every time I hear those blues. That music got a beat that will keep you alive. The kids are rock and rolling from 8 to 25. I don't want to hang up my rock and roll shoes, because my feet start moving every time I hear those blues. Let's rock. Let's roll. They said that
After the
rock and roll
death of Chuck Willis, sax player Gene Barge found himself back home in Norfolk and hanging out at a record store that featured jazz, rhythm and blues, country, and rock records. The store was called Birdland and was owned by Frank Guida. Guida was not only interested in selling records, he also was interested in making records. And by 1959, that interest led him to a singer who for a while had been a member of Gene Vincent's backup band, the Blue Caps. Frank Guida and a friend, Joe Royster, had written a song incorporating the names of all the local high schools in the Norfolk, Virginia area. Tommy Facendo recorded it, and it became a big regional hit. But that wasn't good enough for Frank Guida. He had an idea that he could change the lyrics to the song and make it a regional hit anywhere. So he traveled to New York City to meet Atlantic Records executives, and somehow he talked them into one of the strangest record releases in all of rock and roll history. The group sat down with a map of the United States and figured out how many major metropolitan areas they could target. After that, Tommy Facenda recorded an amazing 46 different versions of that same song, each one tailor-made to specific regions. And Atlantic Records had to press all 46 different versions and distribute them to the proper region of the country. The idea worked, and to this very day there are record collectors still trying to find all 46 versions. Like this one, the one that was written and recorded specifically for the Philadelphia and Lehigh Valley regions.
High School USA.
In the old jukebox. High School USA. Now looking all around, what did I see? Every school kid that could ever be. They come from Olney, Southern Kensington, Northeast Penn and Edison, Bishop Newman, St. Thomas More, Franklin Park and Williamsport, Roman Catholic, St. Hubert's too. Well, I wanna do the high school with Bob with you. Yeah, yeah. Saturday morning they were still going strong.
High School USA.
They've been rocking and rolling all night long.
High School USA.
No time to study on their ABCs.
High School USA.
They're getting their lessons on the birds and the bees.
High School USA.
Yeah, all across the floor they are doing the hop. Everybody doing that a high school bop. They come from Bartram, Lincoln, Lebanon, Cardinal, Daughtry, and Hazleton, West Philadelphia, Germantown, Camden, Frankfurt, and Allentown, Hallahan, Gratz, Dobbins too. Well, I wanna do the high school for Bob with you. That was Overbrook and Edison, St. Bonaventure and Kensington, Reading, York, and Williamsport, St. Maria, Boniface, and Thomas More, Father Judge, and Central too. Well, I wanna do the high school for Bob with you.
High School USA.
After High School USA was a hit for Tommy Facenda, record store owner and now hit record producer Frank Guida was even more determined to start his own label. With sax player Gene Barge still hanging around Guida's Birdland record store, discussions were getting serious on the two of them gathering together some of Norfolk's finest musicians and start recording. At the same time, another regular customer of the record shop that Guida was impressed with was a young singer from Norfolk, Gary Anderson, and Guida just loved his enthusiasm and unique raspy singing voice. By the fall of 1959, the dream was becoming a reality as Guida had set up his new studio in an old two-room ex-retail shop. The recording engineer that was needed was Guida's friend again, Joe Royster. Royster was actually a clothing salesman by trade and had absolutely no training as a recording engineer. But Guida convinced him not to worry, that he would help him with the specifics. And the specifics that Frank Guida had in mind would turn the whole sound of rock and roll music upside down. You see, at the time, rock and roll music generally had a specific format, centered around the electric guitar, and when recorded, trained engineers were always extremely cautious about what are known as recording levels. In the simplest of terms, if a recording engineer keeps the input level mix below a certain level on his meters, the end result is a clean, even sound. And that is exactly what Frank Guida did not want to record on his newly found record label. Instead of the guitar-based, clean recordings he heard everywhere, he was more interested in creating records that would be dominated by the drum beat along with a strong saxophone, trombone, and a bass background. He also wanted to break the rules in another way. He didn't want that clean sound that rock and roll music had become. Guida wanted to record a hot sound, one that would jump out of the transistor radios and record players across the country. So in order to achieve his hot sound, he told his clothing salesman turned recording engineer, Joe Royster, to always keep the input levels on his meters pinned to the red side of the meter, hoping that the end result would be a louder and hotter sound than any other record. The musicians he had gathered around tenor sax player Gene Barge needed a name, so they became the Church Street Five, named after the street in Norfolk where great gospel music was being created at Daddy Grace's church. And all that was left was the singer needed to record a song that Guida had written with Royster. But wait, there would be one more gimmick required to get disc jockeys across the country to even notice a new record label and release. In 1960, the federal government was in the midst of a big advertising campaign to urge citizens to buy U.S. savings bonds. That was all Frank Guida needed to complete his puzzle. And thus that skinny kid with the raspy voice, Gary Anderson, that hung around Guida's record store, would be in for a name change. I asked him how he came upon his unique stage name. Back then you were Gary Anderson.
Yep, used to be that.
How did the U.S. bonds happen on New Orleans?
Let's see now. Frank Guida named me that. And I guess that's why he's my ex-manager. Not really, but I don't know exactly how he got that, except for Mr. Card's Deli next door. He was a man that was interested in the United States savings bonds and the flag and, you know, God Bless America, that whole bit. And he used to have a huge savings bond up in behind his counter there. So I guess Frank kind of got it from that.
Did you really legally change your name?
No, you know what happens, I found out, is after a while, if you're known as that for so long, and you're a single artist, the government automatically changes it. So, you know,
they find you.
So they can get you, you know, and they changed that right away. My first knowledge of Gary U.S. Bonds was when I heard it on the radio. I had no idea that was my name.
I said, hey, 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 yeah. I said, hey, hey, yeah. Well, come on, everybody, take a trip with me. Well, down the Mississippi, down to New Orleans. They got the honeysuckle blooming on the honeysuckle vine. And the love is a
With various lead guitarists added from time to time, this basic group of musicians was now officially known as the Church Street Five and would back up all future recordings on Legrand Records. In addition to backing up lead singers, Frank Guida also had a plan to release instrumental singles of the group. The hit New Orleans was Legrand record 1003, and in fact, the very next release by the label, record number 1004, was the one that brought the name the Church Street Five to the forefront. Gary U.S. Bonds talks about Gene Barge and how the group obtained their unique New Orleans gospel-influenced sound.
Daddy G was Gene Barge. I call him Daddy G because he was older than me. And that's not.
And the name stuck.
And the name stuck. And plus, he used to work in a band that Daddy Grace used to have down in Virginia, which was a big religious guy with the white hair and long fingernails. I remember that. And we used to watch the band come down Church Street. Him in his Cadillac, big long white Cadillac with the red velvet seats in the back, and behind him was the trucks with a large bed in the back with the band on it. And they jammed down the street, you know. It was like, great, wow, that's a groovy sound they had. So we actually kind of stole that, the melody from Daddy Grace's church. Oh, yeah, I like that.
The record release A Night with Daddy G by the Church Street Five became a regional hit in Virginia and as far north as the Lehigh Valley, but not the size hit that Frank Guida had hoped for. However, he had not yet given up on the song. So in the spring of 1961, Guida gathered U.S. Bonds, the Church Street Five, and as many invited and uninvited guests as he could, crammed them into his little two-room studio, with the goal being to record the ultimate party record. And as his tape recorder rolled on, Guida captured the live party that he was looking for. It was the Church Street Five once again playing A Night with Daddy G, only this time, lyrics were being basically ad-libbed by Gary U.S. Bonds. I can remember 1961 hearing A Night with Daddy G on the radio.
Yeah.
And it was one of my favorite instrumentals of all time. The record didn't do too much. It got a lot of airplay. And then a couple months later, I hear words to the song. And Quarter to Three becomes the biggest hit.
Well, we kind of thought that it felt good, you know. It really felt good, so I decided to write some words to it one evening when we were jamming out in the studio. I went in, about 10 minutes later, I came out with these ridiculous words. We sung it and put it down, and lo and behold, it became a hit.
Don't you know that I danced till the 4:03. I really had that night with Daddy G. He was swinging on the sax with the terrible too, and I was dancing all over the room. Don't you know the people were dancing like they were ready? The swingin'est band they had ever had, and the swingin'est song they could ever be is a night with Daddy G. Let me tell you that I never had it so good. Yeah, I know you never did until you get that fellow with that jive and take a band like the Church Street Five. Don't you know that I danced till the 4:03 when they had that night with Daddy G. But everybody was as happy as they could be, 'cause they was singing with my Daddy G. I blow Daddy, I play sweet Daddy, yeah, 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 yeah. I just a little bit of soul now. Let me tell you that I never had it so good. Yeah, I know you never could until you get that fella with that jive and take a man like the Church Street Five. Don't you know that I danced till the 4:03 when they had that night with Daddy G. Everybody was as happy as they could be, 'cause they was singing with my Daddy G. I'm blow Daddy, I'm blow Daddy, yeah, 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 yeah.
Ron Wolfe, Sunday Night Hall of Fame.
During the summer of 1961, Quarter to Three by Gary U.S. Bonds became the #1 record in the country. The next 45 RPM release by the Church Street Five was an obvious, lighthearted jab at the fact that their original instrumental, A Night with Daddy G, was not a hit. But the Gary U.S. Bonds version went all the way to #1. Entitled I'm Gonna Sue, the record was nothing more than A Night with Daddy G slowed down to a snail's pace. Gene Barge, also known as Daddy G in the Church Street Five, remained together and played the role of Legrand's house band right into the middle 1960s. And you can hear their very unique instrumentation on all of the hits of Gary U.S. Bonds, as well as another Norfolk artist, Jimmy Soul. However, by 1964, the British music invasion was in full swing, and the sound that had turned the record industry upside down in 1960 had pretty well run its course. Looking back today, it's easy to see how Frank Guida's productions featuring the raspy soul voice of Gary U.S. Bonds and great tenor sax of Gene Barge influenced another whole generation of rock and roll music. Some rock historians credit Guida with giving Phil Spector the idea to create his wall of sound. And then there was Gary U.S. Bonds. His vocal sound has been echoed by the likes of Rod Stewart and, of course, The Boss. However, Bruce Springsteen not only expressed his admiration for the Norfolk sound over the years, in 1981 he even rescued Gary U.S. Bonds from relative obscurity and put him back in the charts by producing an album called Dedication. And that album featured the hit single, This Little Girl. And if you want to take the example even further, Bruce Springsteen's answer to Gene Barge was, of course, Clarence Clemons. On this week's Hall of Fame show, we now continue our salute to Legrand Records and their incredible house band, the Church Street Five.
The Valley's greatest hits of all time. Oldies 99.9.
tell you. Well, now there's a new dance that's known as the twist. It's really not new, it's something you miss. Well, there's a new dance that's known as the twist. It's really not new, it's something you miss. Dear lady, get up from your chair. Dear lady, get up from your chair. Well, now 'cause doctors agree, so I've been told. Do the twist and you'll never grow old. But one night I happened to go to a dance, believing I'd find me some romance. And this old lady I happened to see, I said, come on, baby, do the new twist with me. Dear lady, get up from your chair. Oh, dear lady, get up from your chair. Oh, well, now 'cause doctors agree, so I've been told. Do the twist and you'll never grow old.
The Valley's greatest hits of all time. Oldies 99.9.
If you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty one for your wife. So for my personal point of view, get another girl to marry you. If you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty one for your wife. So for my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. A pretty woman makes a husband look small, and very often causes his downfall. As soon as he marries her, then she starts to do the things that will break his heart. But if you make an ugly woman your wife, you'll be happy for the rest of your life. An ugly woman cook pills on time, she'll always give you peace of mind. If you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife. So from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. Don't let your friends say you have no taste. Go ahead and marry anyway. Your face is ugly, my eyes don't match. Take it from me, she's a better catch. If you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife. So from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. Say man, baby, I saw your wife the other day. Yeah, she's ugly. Yeah, but she sure can cook, baby. Yeah, you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife. So from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. If you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife. So from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. If you wanna be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife.
Rod Wolfe, Sunday Night Hall of Fame.
Oldies 99.9. The Sunday Night Hall of Fame show, your vinyl resting place every week after the Gene K. Jamboree. Hope you enjoyed our tribute to Legrand Records and the backup band, Gene Barge and the Church Street 5. Music for Lovers Only and Lovers Lonely is next. We'll have some more What Came First, the instrumental version or the vocal version of some great songs. It's our tribute to the instrumentals of the 50s and 60s on tonight's Hall of Fame show. Here's one more from Daddy G, Gene Barge, and the Church Street 5. It's Monkey Time.
kids. The greatest hits of all time. Rod Wolf's Sunday Night Hall of Fame. Oldies 99.9.